Ladies and gentlemen, I'm your host Adil Raja, and I welcome you to another episode of A Soldier Speaks English, we're launching this new format, which is called Geopolitics East and West, and I am launching it with Theo-A-Mullis. Theo is a very good friend. You may not recognize him because he's looking like 10 years younger, and and he's a very good son. That is why he's looking 10 years younger, because he's shaved off his beard and his mustaches because his mom wanted him to, and he's looking really nice. Theo, you're looking very nice. Actually, I told you behind the scenes as well. Anyway, this program, the concept is, before I come to Theo and ask him, in fact, just let's go about asking you, how have you been? What's going on? Where have you been? And it's been quite a long time, like a couple of months past. So people have been asking me, where is Theo? So where were you, Theo, and what's going on?
So I was due to be in Ukraine late last year. Unfortunately, my family suffered a bereavement. My stepfather passed away. So I've had to stay in the UK, support my family, support my mother through this very difficult time for all of us. My partner, she lost some people in her family as well. So it sort of came at us a lot over the last few months. And additionally, I was thinking about going back to Ukraine this month, but plans again fell through. So I have been continuing my work. There's been a little bit of a lull while we deal with these, through the grieving process and all of that. But hopefully back in Ukraine in the first quarter of this year. I'm going to Poland in a couple of weeks, and we'll see where things go. But it's been a difficult time. Now we are sort of back on the train.
Well, please accept our sincerest condolences for the bereavement and your family and your partner's family. So moving forward, Theo, a lot of bereavement is going on around the world as well as we speak. So we need to touch upon them briefly, because what's going on in Iran right now is really contagious for the entire Middle Eastern region. Then the aggressive posturing by the President Trump camp, in which he, practically abducted the Venezuelan President Maduro, and that is a new normal. And other states can also, take advantage of that new normal. But irrespective of, the regime change, or they have not been able to meet the objectives of that stated regime change so far. That is oil, because the Venezuelan
regime change.
Yeah. So even the regime change is not completed, but regime change is the oldest trick in the book of the US and the US deep state and CIA. Pakistan has also been an effectee, but the Western countries are not much bothered about that, because it is not. It doesn't suit their foreign policy, maybe, and they are comfortable with the Pakistani military junta. But that's not the topic today, but we will briefly touch upon it. But then the eyes and the Venezuelan oil infrastructure is definitely not in a condition which can give them the benefits they thought they could get. So either the situation in Middle East gets worse, the oil prices goes sharply up, making it and stays up for a couple of years, making it possible for the Venezuelan oil and infrastructure investment for the major oil companies, or the war in Iran must not start, which Israel definitely wants it to start, and they want to get it over and done with. And then the ambitions of President Trump to go and take over Greenland. And that is also something which, in fact, clearly indicating the cracks in the Western alliance. And there are views that if the Western alliance is going to fall, then individual states like the United Kingdom needs to rise up to the occasion, instead of being taken as fair game for foreign intelligence agencies like the Chinese and the Pakistanis anyone can come and attack dissidents, like Iran also attack dissidents, and in the future, you'll find then the Israelis will come and they will also do the same. So if UK is considered fair game, or European Union is considered fair game after the visible cracks in the Western alliance, so what is the future, and what is the future of Greenland? And of course, Ukraine is connected. These all developments are connected. So Iran is the hottest topic, I know. But before that, let's go in a reverse order, because it started from Ukraine and you've been reporting from Ukraine. So very briefly, what is the update on Ukraine, Theo?
So, I mean, the update is almost status quo for the last year. The lines, in terms of the line of contact, have not been moving very far. Pokrovsk is mostly under Russian control. Bear in mind, the aim for the Russian army of 2025 was to take Pokrovsk, a town with a pre-war population in the mere tens of thousands. And bear in mind that before the war started, the Russian army was considered the second army of the world. It was a monolith with 12,000 tanks, etc. And now they've been degraded to a point where taking a town was the goal of an entire year for a country which is very much on a war footing. And in taking most of Pokrovsk, they have also lost another very important Kupiansk, which the Ukrainians counterattacked and have managed to mostly liberate. That's an area of the line where I have actually been. I've met the soldiers working in that area. They're competent, they're diligent, and they're good at their work. But the situation is difficult, regardless. Certainly for the Ukrainian side, power cuts are now the norm. When I first traveled to Kyiv in February of last year, I didn't experience any power cuts at all. But now they are rolling, and there are a number of reasons for that. We've seen a large corruption scandal that involved money being siphoned away from a project that was meant to harden power infrastructure. And it caused essentially the fall of Yermak, who was Zelensky's essentially second guy, his main lieutenant, and the fall of a number of other officials. One fled the country, another was arrested. And now essentially we're seeing the results of that. Not only that, Russian drones, the Geran, which is a model built on the Iranian Shahid drone, have become more advanced, but it's a constant cat and mouse game between the defenses that Ukraine has and Russia's attempts to get around them to attack Ukrainian cities, infrastructure, and, as so often is the case, civilians, because a lot of these raids are terror raids.
So two very important takeouts. Firstly, the Iranian defense technology is involved in the Ukrainian conflict and the Russians are using it. Secondly, all right, first,
I need to expand on the first one.
Yes, please.
So the original design came from Iran. It was called the Shahid. The Iranians sold these. Bear in mind, when you're talking about these authoritarian countries, it's very rarely a donation. It's almost always a quid pro quo. Mm-hmm. And the Russians have built on that design and improved it significantly into what's now they're calling the Geran. So it looks like a Shahid, but internally, in terms of materials, etc., it's a very different animal.
All right. So, secondly, because we are going to talk about Iran, so we are establishing a connection why we are going right, left, and center. We are roaming around the globe. Ultimately, we're coming to the latest situation, the hotspot, Iran. They are all connected. There's a method to this madness, and I'm just that's what I'm trying to establish. I'm trying to do the dot connecting exercise. Secondly, Theo, on a very sensitive topic, do you believe that the Trump administration of the United States really want the Ukraine conflict to be over? or they're just dragging it on and they're just not taking it serious enough, and they're just calling President Zelensky and the European leaders and schooling them in the Oval Office, like the President Trump's latest pictures showed after the Venezuelan attack. What do you think about that? What do you think is the ultimate goal of the United States in this entire conflict, Ukraine conflict?
So actually, yes, I do think the United States wants the Ukraine conflict to end, but there's a really big caveat there, in that they don't care how. They don't care really if it ends with a very unjust peace, which would leave Ukraine open to a further attack in 5 or 10 years' time. They just, essentially, Trump just wants to add it to his list of wars he's stopped. And if you actually look at the list, if you look, he said, I stopped the war in Gaza. He didn't. I stopped the war in Cambodia and Thailand. Again, that's hot. That's gotten hot again recently. He doesn't really care, as long as he can add it to his little list. And there are significant figures within the State Department and within the US apparatus, which are very anti-Ukraine and see Russia as a larger country, a greater potential trading partner in future, and don't really care about, and we're certainly going to get onto this, don't really care about the idea of sovereignty and would rather live in a world where might makes right. So it really depends on who you come from. There have been suggestions that there are 3 camps within American policy when it comes to Ukraine. There was the sort of Keith Kellogg camp, which was pro-Ukraine and pro-democracy, essentially. There's the Witkoff camp, which was Trump's guy. Witkoff I think will go down as one of the worst diplomats in history, or attempted diplomats. He doesn't have any diplomatic training at all. He was a real estate guy who went golfing with Trump. Here's an example. He went to the Kremlin to speak with Putin, as he has done on a number of occasions, and he didn't bring his own Russian translator. So the Russians provided him with one, which is...
we're talking about basically a crypto guy, basically a crypto and a business partner of President Trump. So that's what's going on, actually. A lot of family enterprises involved in the US government right now. And all the focus is shifted by attack on Venezuela and by the ICE agents, wreaking havoc in the United States. So all the media focus is over there. But below the surface, a lot is going on, but that's not our topic. But we do criticize the Russians and the Chinese for their effectively over here for their expansionist designs, right? Yeah. So what about the American expansionist designs once they talk about taking over Greenland? What's that about?
Terrifying. The United States has become, and Denmark has now recognized it, for example. Denmark controls Greenland, although Greenland is semi-autonomous, has its own parliament, etc., and has the right to secede from Denmark should it want to. Denmark has recognized the US officially as a security threat, which it is. I mean, they've already sent allegations that they have sent CIA people to Greenland. They have refused repeatedly to rule out using a military force to take over Greenland. Greenland it's not nearly as big as it may seem on a global map. It's maybe about the third the size that those, because maps, as people often know, they distort the size of countries. The United States appears much larger than it is. Africa appears smaller than it actually is. Greenland is much smaller than it may seem to be. Population 52,000. And what this is about, I think, from the United States perspective, or from the perspective of Trump, is he's very worried about the midterms, and he's after a big win and gaining territory for the United States, the first president to do that in decades, and perhaps even in the 20th century. He could try to sell that as a huge win. As for why, and he says security concerns, the Russians, the Chinese, Denmark is not protecting it enough. Well, the United States has a right under an agreement in 1951 with the Kingdom of Denmark to build bases. At the height of the Cold War, they had 30 bases in Greenland with around just shy of 10,000 personnel.
So what's the ultimate purpose? What is the ultimate purpose? Only political point scoring for the midterms or for the elections?
I think it's twofold. Yeah. Twofold, maybe a third, depending on who you're speaking to. So yes, political for the midterms. Also, we've got to remember the Arctic race. So something that's underway at the moment. Countries with access to the far north or far south are recognizing that as the ice begins to melt due to climate change, resources that were previously trapped under hundreds of meters of pack ice may be much more accessible and exploitable. Now, the people of Greenland don't want to exploit these resources. They rather like the way that they live. They don't want enormous mines and factories. However, getting access to those resources decades from now is something that the Americans very much like to do. But another thing, they could simply speak with the people of Greenland and sell it to them and sell that idea. Hey, we'll build this mine, you'll be able to get more jobs, etc. They don't need political control of the territory to do that.
Why would they need more jobs? They're only 52,000 people. I'm sure they're happy with
that's something that exactly, they're happy with the way they're living.
You want to sell them the American dream, and you want to sell them the capitalist dream, right? But they don't want to buy it.
And McDonald's, they don't want to buy it. Yeah.
All right. So, but the same thing happened in Venezuela, where Venezuelan has got the largest proven reserves of oil. Fine. With that in mind, it was an oil war. Everybody was terming it so. So they picked up Maduro, and Chinese investment was there, and it's also about the great power rivalry. So effectively, they have, and the Chinese have gone to, they've taken the legal route, and even if they won, if the Chinese win a verdict in their favor in the International Court of Arbitration or wherever, well, that is going to cost the US for sure. And there's an alternative monetary system to SWIFT system, which is the BRICS system, which is already online. Nobody's talking about it. But the Venezuelan oil fantasy, I would say. Why? Because proven reserves are there. But most recently, we've learned that those oil reserves require hundreds of billions of dollars of investment by the oil majors, US oil majors. And the US oil majors are not willing to invest that money in the extraction of Venezuelan oil for two reasons. Firstly, the oil prices are very low. They're only around $60 a barrel. They need to be above 100, around 140 for them to be able to invest that kind of money in there. And they need to stay up there for at least 2 to 3 years. And that can only happen if the Middle East oil supply is disrupted, and that can only get disrupted if there is a war going on in the Middle East. So if an attack on Iran happens and Iran responds through its proxies, there'll be war in the Middle East. But that will create a problem which even the American economy cannot sustain at this point in time. Maybe in a couple of years they would be able to do that by the time the Venezuelan oil infrastructure is developed enough. But who's going to put that money? It's a catch-22 situation. Yeah. So then, did the U.S. administration did not think, they did not think it through before attacking Venezuela the way they did? And now they find out that the oil is also no good because, firstly, it's very expensive to extract. Secondly, the pricing mechanism. Thirdly, the Venezuelan oil is very dirty, very crude. It requires a lot of money to, refine it compared to the Middle Eastern oil. It is not that good. So what do you think was going on over there in President Trump's mind once he went ahead with it and he didn't think it through?
Okay, so there are a number of factors I think at play. For a start, we've got the new national security strategy and the resurrection of the Monroe Doctrine. So this is an idea that the United States has a sphere of influence that is basically it's the Americas. This is ours. We will not allow hostile states to exist here. Every state has to be friendly to the United States. And this is something that was originally written in, at the height of the imperial age. They didn't want European powers setting up colonies, etc., in the Americas. And it's been resurrected now because Trump believes in spheres of power. He believes that might makes right. And as for the motivations, well, he sold it to the American people as a counter drug thing, despite the fact that most Venezuelan drug products, although there are cartels operating within the country, they do export drugs. Most of them are cocaine based, and a lot of that actually travels to Europe, not the Americas. And it's not the main drug which is reaping so many lives in the United States, which is fentanyl, which is an opiate-based substance, which is generally manufactured in Mexico with precursors from China. So, and then you get on to, again, the political concerns within the United States. What do unpopular governments throughout history occasionally like to do? Engage in short, victorious wars. Now, this war was certainly very short, and in terms of its objectives, and I think we do have to give a moment here, a really astounding operation, moralities, ethics aside, probably go down as one of the most slick operations in special operations history, if not the most. But it doesn't seem to have worked. When you look at the polling, it really sits on a knife edge between approval and disapproval. And then when you get to risk of further US involvement in Venezuela, Trump said, we're not afraid of boots on the ground. That goes really heavily into the American people do not want this. They don't want, they remember the experiences of Iraq and Afghanistan, and they recognize those generally as errors, as mistakes. They don't want to go through that again. So a mistake there, I would say. And certainly when it comes to the oil extraction, he was very, very blunt about that. Those wells, after decades of maximum extraction and minimum investment in the infrastructure, the wells are completely shot, right? They're pumping maybe, I think, about a fifth of what they should be, given the infrastructure that is there, or that is there on paper. And the regime hasn't changed. Delcy Rodriguez, who was previously vice president and oil minister, has taken over, and she allegedly was on the phone with Marco Rubio moments after the attack happened, and is a technocrat. She believes in the entrenchment of keeping the regime intact. And this regime in Venezuela is not like a dictatorship of personality where you take out the head and the whole thing falls down. It's very entrenched. They have a very top-heavy military with a lot of generals, and all those generals basically run elements of the country. You may be familiar with this setup. You get rid of one guy, the whole thing isn't going to fall apart.
Yeah,
so
that's true.
ExxonMobil has said we're not interested in investing in Venezuela. It would cost too much money, and not to mention US oil companies have been kicked out twice now, and so Venezuela is a high risk for them.
Yeah, so at the end of the day, as you've said, the approval and the disapproval ratings clearly tell you, and the pros and cons completely tell you that irrespective of the fact that this was an outstanding military operation, a stealth operation, but even then they have been unable to attain the end goals because they have not thought it through. It is very simple.
I don't think so.
So do you think that is the reason why President Trump, irrespective of lobbying by Tel Aviv, by the Israelis, and the lobbying, and of course the regional powers, the Middle Eastern countries, the Muslim Middle Eastern countries, even India, Pakistan, Saudi Arabia, they do not want a war in Iran because it will spill over to the Middle East. And then again, Iran has got a lot of oil, which is under sanctions. All right, that's understandable. Only been smuggled to Pakistan by the Pakistani military. But that's all right because they are good boys. They listen to the orders by CENTCOM, so they're not to be bothered with, So they're providing you, they're providing services as mercenaries when it's required. But they don't want a war in Iran because Iran's got proxies in Pakistan. They've got proxies in the entire region, Syria, Yemen, even in Saudi Arabia, in Lebanon. Israelis want a war, obviously. But President Trump is reluctant, seemingly, Do you think it is because of the Venezuelan lessons learned from Venezuela?
I think the opposite. I disagree. I don't think he's reluctant. He recently, tweeted, "Keep protesting. We're coming."
Yeah, he made certain statements.
Yeah, and the operation like Venezuela, I think Trump sees this as a success, right? And when you succeed in something, you might be willing to try it again. And an action against Iran will have been war-gamed because it's long been an adversary of the United States. Time and time again, the US will have a plan on paper to do something here. But I think they'll get a war potentially without involvement from the United States. I was speaking with an exiled Iranian pro-democracy chap, Dr. Ali Sharif, very recently. These protests are different. They're different from Women Life Freedom in 2022. They're different from the Green Movement 2009. And one of the key things behind this is Iran has made so many strategic errors recently. October 7th was an absolute strategic error. Its proxy Hezbollah has been very much degraded by the Israelis. Their proxies in Yemen have been degraded. And the economy of Iran is completely shot. And this is one of the things that's at the core of this. The spark that caused this round of uprisings started in the Grand Bazaar. And the bazaar merchants in Tehran were very supportive of the Ayatollah during the revolution against the Shah. And they've traditionally been supportive of the Ayatollah, but now that is changing. They were the ones who went on strike because the rial, since the 12-day war, has tanked.
Yeah, it has gone values. Fine. The rial is equivalent to it has zeroed out, it has flattened out. Fine, but let me give you a counter perspective, Theo. In the regional perspective, people are saying that it is, and obviously it's an oppressive and authoritarian regime, and there's a very genuine dissent there. But people are saying, and the old timers, the boomers, they are still supporting the regime, by the way, and they are propagating it quite widely in the entire region. But there is a very strong narrative in the region, in the Middle East and Asia as a whole, the global South, or the East, because since East and West, what you are saying is a Western perspective. The Eastern perspective is that it has been instigated, and I know there are a lot of gray areas there, but the narrative which is holding right now is, by and large, in the region, in the East, is that it is an American and Israeli venture, that they want a regime change in Iran, because obviously they want to get hold of the resources in Iran. And Shah's son is supported by Netanyahu, who is a war criminal. Whatsoever is done in Gaza is going to happen again. So that, and obviously there's the internet blackout, and they're only churning out their own narrative from there. They've even blocked Starlink of Elon Musk.
That's actually something I want to talk about. We're talking about the Russians and the Chinese.
But I'm giving you the counter argument over here, and there's a strong argument that Mossad is directly involved in Iran, and they don't make a secret of it anyway. So it is, they're saying that it's being instigated by the Americans, and the Americans are not making any secret of it. Look what President Trump...
In big trouble. It looks to me that the people are taking over certain cities that nobody thought were really possible just a few weeks ago. We're watching the situation very carefully. I've made the statement very strongly that if they start killing people like they have in the past, we will get involved. We'll be hitting them very hard where it hurts. And that doesn't mean boots on the ground, but it means hitting them very, very hard where it hurts. So we don't want that to happen. There have been cases like this where President Obama totally backed down. But this is something pretty incredible that's happening in Iran. It's an amazing thing to watch. They've done a bad job. They've treated their people very badly, and now they're being paid back. So let's see what happens. We're watching it. We're watching.
All right, Theo, he made a promise that if people get killed, protesters get killed, Iran is going to come out, and America will get involved. So far, There are reports of, because they are so not confirmed reports. Somebody says 50,
yeah.
somebody says 500, somebody is saying 5,000. So we'll take a mean figure of 500 people, all right, which is very, very conservative and very low figure, because there are orders of shoot at sight in Iran against all the protesters. The thousands are being killed, and those which has been and many thousands have been arrested, who will be given death penalty. As the precedents, as I've been and other journalists in Pakistan have been given 2 life sentences in absentia, but those guys are there in their custody, and they are going to get that kind of sentence, because there is precedence. When would the President Trump get involved, if at all he's going to get involved? Instead, he's announced sanctions to the tariffs on countries which are doing trade with Iran. Fine, but on ground, the counter narrative is getting stronger by the day, and internet is shut down, and there is a very severe crackdown on dissent in Iran. So what do you think? He's criticizing Obama. He backed out. What do you think he's going to do?
Well, Trump will never pass up an opportunity to criticize Obama or Biden. But I want to, again, echo the words of Dr. Sharif when he told me that we don't want foreign involvement. We don't want a foreign intervention. The Iranian resistance can do this on their own. They have kicked the Revolutionary Guard out of cities, out of towns, sans the Revolutionary Guard's weapons. And as for the son of the Shah, they, according to Dr. Sharif, there are going to be dissenting opinions from exiled Iranians, of course, as well, and Iranians within the country. He says we don't want a Shah. We don't want the Ayatollahs, nor do we want a Shah. We want Iran to be Iran. We want neither. Yeah, we want a democracy in Iran. We don't want a monarchy. We don't want the rule of the Ayatollahs. And it's like, it's striking to me whether or not there's CIA, Mossad involvement. I think certainly likely in Iran. I think we can say yes, there is. But I think putting it entirely on those two organizations would be removing a significant amount of agency from the Iranian people.
That's what's going on. That's what's going on, actually.
But not entirely. Not entirely, Adil.
No, you're right. You're talking facts. I'm talking the perception which is being built, and perception is much more important than reality.
So I want to answer that perception. When you have power cuts in a country, rolling power cuts in the capital of a country which sits on one of the world's largest oil reserves, when you have rolling water cuts, when the value of your currency is basically nil, inflation is at 50%, you can't get work, you have an educated population, a young educated population who don't see a future for themselves and who are being regularly oppressed. And this is not the first uprising. You have this, I can 2005, 2009, 2022, and now today. The regime in Iran may have legitimacy from the Iran-Iraq war, from the revolution, but it has lost it amongst enormous numbers of the population. And it speaks very significantly to me that the bazaar merchants who traditionally have been supportive of the regime, and a lot of these previous uprisings were based in the cities where you have a younger population and where people are more, to use the word, liberal, I guess. And it has spread from those cities, and it is now in every province of Iran. That is different. And I don't think, and this is something I often say to people who say, the Maidan revolution in Ukraine was a CIA operation. You cannot pay people enough to go out unarmed and be shot by the security forces.
That's
you give them $20,000.
Very valid argument. There is a genuine dissent which must be acknowledged, and it must not be allowed to be buried under the religious sentiment or the ethnic religious sentiment which is happening right now. What are the chances of the Iranian regime surviving? They have been surviving for, let's say, for a better part of half a century now. What do you think the chances of them surviving this recent what should you call it? It's not a rebellion, not a full-blown rebellion at least, but what do you call this movement for democracy?
I just don't know. Everybody thought, oh, after the 12-day war, that's it for the regime. After Women, Life, Freedom, that's going to be it for the regime. The Green Movement, that'll be it for the regime. These regimes often seem intractable. They seem really solid in place until suddenly they collapse. We saw this, the fall of the USSR. We saw this in Syria. Nobody thought that HTS and al-Shara with his small band of fighters would be able to take on the Russians and the Syrian Arab army until the whole thing collapsed. And now it seems inevitable. Of course, there is no way they could have held off HTS. So I don't know. There's not enough information coming out of Iran. And you mentioned the jamming of Starlink. That's really significant because recently we saw IL-76 planes fly from Russia and Belarus and land at Tehran airport. And there was a lot of speculation as to what was in those aircraft. But a few days after they started landing, Starlink started getting turned off. And Russia has a lot of experience in trying to jam Starlink because the Ukrainians use it and the Russians actually use it as well in the war there. And I think the Russians are selling some of their expertise and potentially the Chinese as well to Iran to try and jam these systems. And Starlink previously was thought to be very, very secure. And some stuff is getting out through Starlink systems, but it's getting harder and harder.
So, I would say finally to the critics of whatever is going on in Iran, the critics of the West is that, all right, fine, it might be going on with the help of the West. That is what you're selling. Fine, all right. You're saying that the Iranian regime have got lots of support and that's why they came out in London. All right, fine. Then what are you scared of? Open the internet, open access to the journalist, and let the flow of information flow out freely and flow in freely. If you're not scared and if you think that whatever is going on is only a conspiracy by the West and Israel, all right, fine, then open up. Let the world come in and see. What are you scared of? That is the problem. Please listen. Let things, churn out naturally, or hold elections, free and fair elections. Call international observers. Open up. You have to open up ultimately, but that does not suit the Chinese model, I suppose. No. And it is at the end of the day a question of great power rivalry. I don't want to oversimplify things, but we will take these discussions onward. There is a lot to be discussed in the series of Geopolitics, East and West, in which the changing world, the new alliances needs to be discussed, how it is going to impact the livelihoods of ordinary people in the world, in different regions and businesses. We are going to discuss it all, so stay tuned to Geopolitics, East and West, and you can subscribe to our channels. It's a collaboration between Soldier Speaks and Theo is going to tell you about his channel, and you can also see it on his channel as well. So over to you, Theo. Where can you be found?
So I can be found on Dictators v Democrats YouTube channel and Substack channel as well. Part of what I do is I have a podcast called Dictators v Democrats, Why We Fight, and I interview dissidents. I interview people who I believe are fighting for democracy around the world. So I've interviewed Adil, I've interviewed Mr. Taha Siddiqui. An upcoming interview is with Ahmed Zakayev, who is the prime minister in exile of Ichkeria, a region of Chechnya, which is held by the Russians. North Korean dissidents, Chinese dissidents, Ukrainian soldiers, soldiers from the West, General Hodges, for example.
And American journals as well.
American generals, a couple of them. So I try to find out sort of why they do what they do and what they believe in. And that's what's very important to me. And so, on the channel, I also discuss the news in democracy and where democracy is succeeding, where it's failing, and where we're going. Because we talk about a great power rivalry. The way I see it is we have a rivalry between authoritarianism, between the dictators, and between democracy, between Democrats. And democracy can be many things.
That's true. A lot of interesting debate would come on. You're most you're requested to please subscribe to Theo-A-Mullis' channel. The link is available in the description of this video, and it is a video in collaboration anyway. And you can watch it on Soldier Speaks English and Soldier Speaks Reloaded as well. So take care of yourself, and hopefully see you again next week on Wednesday. Thank you, Theo.
Thank you very much, Adil.